In the cold silence after a massacre, only the wind dares to whisper his name. They called him Ivar the Boneless, a name that conjures myth, fear, and revulsion. To his enemies, he was a monster born of curses. To his people, a god-touched warlord forged by pain. No bones, they said, no mercy, and no equal. Long before Europe trembled beneath the boots of the Mongols, before the Crusades turned faith into blood, there was Ivar, born broken in a world of wolves, raised among raiders, outcasts and kings, the son of Ragnar Lodbrok, one of the greatest Viking heroes of legend, but cursed at birth, his limbs twisted, his body weak. In a world where strength was everything, Ivar should have died before his first winter. And when his father was thrown into a pit of vipers by a foreign king, it was Ivar who rose. Not on legs, but on vengeance. He didn't just come for justice, he came to burn kingdoms. With his brothers, he unleashed the great heathen army upon Anglo-Saxon England, a tide of steel and fire that would change Europe forever. But beneath every legend lies a deeper truth. Was Ivar truly boneless, or was it a metaphor for something darker? Was he a cripple carried by others, or a master of fear, rage, and manipulation? This is not just a story of war. It's a story of survival, of defiance, of a boy who was never supposed to live long enough to become a terror. And even now, more than 1,000 years later, his name echoes in the sagas of Scandinavia, the soil of England, and the nightmares of kings.
A world where survival meant raiding, where glory was won not in peace, but in conquest. Kings were little more than warlords with enough gold and swords to keep rivals at bay. There were no borders, only territories claimed by the strongest and defended with ruthless precision. And yet, beneath this chaos, a culture thrived. Norse society was built on honor and kinship, myth and memory. The old gods, Odin the All-Father, Thor the Thunderer, Freyja the Fierce, were ever present. Their tales were carved into stone, sung around firelight, and etched into the minds of warriors. The concept of fate, or Wyrd, reigned supreme. Every death, every triumph, every curse was part of a grand design. It was into this world that Ragnar Lodbrok rose half myth, half man. A farmer who became a warlord. A warlord who became legend. His fame stretched beyond the fjords, reaching into Francia, into Anglo-Saxon England, into the courts of kings who could neither understand nor stop him. Some claimed he slew a dragon. Others whispered he was descended from Odin himself. Ragnar's final raid ended in betrayal. Captured by King Alar of Northumbria, he was thrown into a pit of venomous serpents, unarmed, abandoned, and left to die a slow and agonizing death. But not before delivering a warning, a prophecy, my sons will come for you. At the time of Ragnar's death, England was fractured, not one nation, but many squabbling kingdoms. Each had their own kings, their own ambitions, and their own enemies. The land was rich, its churches heavy with silver, its fields fertile, its people unprepared for what was coming. They had fought Vikings before, quick raids, brutal ambushes along the coasts. But they had never faced what was about to descend upon them, the great heathen army. Led by Ragnar's sons, Ivar, Ubba, Sigurd, Halfdan, it was more than a raid. It was a calculated campaign of vengeance, conquest, and domination. A coalition of Norse clans united not just by blood, but by fury. And at the center of it all was Ivar. Where his brothers fought with sword and shield, Ivar fought with strategy. Where others took what they could, Ivar reshaped the map. And where many believed he was too broken to rule, Ivar built an empire on the bones of those who doubted him. According to the sagas, Ivar's birth was cursed. His mother, a Slorg, warned Ragnar not to consummate their union too soon after a ritual, a spiritual taboo. Ragnar ignored the warning. The child that came into the world had no bones. His limbs were soft like a serpent's. Some believed it a punishment. Others, a sign. He watched. He listened. He mastered the art of war, not with muscle, but with mind. While others clashed steel, Ivar moved armies like pieces on a board. Where most Vikings sought plunder, Ivar sought power. The great heathen army, the largest Viking force the Anglo-Saxons had ever seen, landed on the shores of East Anglia in the year 865 AD. But this was no ordinary raid. There were no hit-and-run tactics. No quick escapes. This was a siege. A reckoning. Though many remembered him for what he lacked, the frailty of his legs, the strange deformity of his body, Ivar proved that the mind was the deadliest weapon. He didn't swing his axe wildly like his brother Ubba, nor did he crave chaos like Sigurd's snake in the eye. Ivar was a planner, a predator. Calm. Cold. Calculated. He would not merely kill King Aila, he would make history remember it. Ivar's forces swept through East Anglia and Mercia, gathering men, seizing horses, and making alliances. The Anglo-Saxon kings were fractured, prideful, and blind to the scale of what was unfolding. Ivar used that. He watched them turn on each other, and then picked them off one by one. And then, in 867 AD, he moved on Northumbria. King Aila, the man who had executed Ragnar, had no idea what was coming. He had claimed victory over the most legendary Viking raider alive, and believed it made him untouchable. But when Ivar's army surrounded York, Aila saw the truth. Too late. The sagas claim Aila was executed in a ritual reserved for the most hated enemies of the Norse, the blood eagle. His ribs, cut from the spine, spread like wings. His lungs pulled outward. A sacrifice to Odin. A message to kings. With Northumbria broken, Ivar pressed forward. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms tried to resist, but one by one, they buckled. Mercia fell. East Anglia submitted. Forts were burned, churches stripped, monks slaughtered. For decades, the English had laughed at the Norse as barbaric sea-wolves. But now, they were architects of empire. He was no longer just Ragnar's son. He was Ivar in Danelaw, Ivar the Boneless, a name whispered in terror. He installed puppet kings. Built alliances with discontented nobles. Some Vikings looted. Others stayed. The Norse were not just raiders anymore. They were settlers, and England was being reshaped. Yet Ivar remained a mystery. His leadership style was not driven by charisma, but by fear and foresight. He rarely charged into battle. Instead, he positioned his enemies like chess pieces, wearing them down through siege, deception, and dread. He crushed hope before he crushed bone. But even among his own people, Ivar's ruthlessness was unsettling. He would punish insubordination with death. Questioning his strategy was akin to betrayal. And as his power grew, so did his paranoia. In 869 AD, the Vikings took East Anglia again, this time with blood. The local king, Edmund, refused to renounce his Christian faith. Ivar gave him a choice: submit or die. Edmund refused. The result was one of the most brutal executions in Anglo-Saxon history. Some said Ivar tied the king to a tree, filled his body with arrows, then had him beheaded. Others said it was worse. Regardless, the legend of Saint Edmund was born. And so was the beginning of Viking England. Ivar didn't just conquer. He colonized. The lands they seized became known as the Danelaw, territories governed by Norse laws and customs. New towns rose. Trade boomed. Cultures clashed and slowly began to merge. Ivar's vision was bigger than revenge. He wanted to build something that would outlast his body, a kingdom in a foreign land. And for a time, he succeeded. While Ivar scorched the heartlands of England, one kingdom held the line, Wessex. And at its helm stood a man who would become one of history's most revered monarchs, Alfred the Great. Alfred was everything Ivar was not: pious, scholarly, devout. But beneath his bookish image burned the heart of a warrior king. He refused to surrender. Refused to kneel. And when the Vikings came for him, he didn't flee. From fortified burhs to hit-and-run tactics, Alfred adapted. He studied Ivar, matched his cruelty with cunning. And slowly, the tide began to turn. And though the war raged on for years, Alfred's resistance sparked a turning point. He proved that the Norse were not invincible, that even Ivar could be slowed, stalled, perhaps even undone. As the years passed, Ivar's body continued to deteriorate. Whatever his condition truly was, be it bone disease, paralysis, or divine punishment, it began to take its toll. Some say he had to be carried into battle on a shield. Others claim he fought from a war chariot. His presence was terrifying, but fleeting. A ghost on the battlefield. A god in a dying frame. Sometime in the late 870s or early 880s, Ivar disappears from the records. Some say he died in battle. Others claim he succumbed to disease. Some even believe he returned to Ireland, where he had ruled for a time as a sea king. For years, Ivar had moved like a storm across England. His name alone was enough to make men flee. He shattered kings, rewrote borders, and claimed land with both steel and strategy. But even storms die. And Ivar was starting to crack. The turning point wasn't a single battle. It wasn't a grand betrayal or heroic stand. It was erosion, slow, creeping, and inevitable. Ivar's iron grip on the great heathen army began to loosen. His own brothers, once loyal and bloodbound by vengeance, began to drift. Ubba grew restless, desiring plunder, not politics. Halfdan eyed his own kingdom in Northumbria. Sigurd vanished from records altogether. And Ivar, he remained cold and still. Watching. Planning. But always seated, never standing. His physical condition, once mythologized as a symbol of resilience, became a quiet liability. He could command fear, but no longer loyalty. Some say he refused to share power. Others say he lashed out in cruelty, executing those who questioned him. There are tales of Ivar killing Norse chieftains in cold blood simply for speaking of peace. He ruled with fear, but fear has an expiration date. And as Alfred of Wessex continued to rebuild, Ivar's inner circle began to crumble. In 878 AD, the Saxons struck back. At the Battle of Sinwit, one of the most infamous Viking leaders fell, Ubba, Ivar's brother, his blade, his rage. He died not in conquest, but in desperation, cornered by the Saxons and slaughtered on English soil. To the Christian chroniclers, it was divine justice. To the Norse, it was a bad omen. The gods were turning their faces. With his brothers gone or dead, and his army splintering, he became a hollow shell of the warlord who once brought kingdoms to their knees. He built fortresses, burhs, designed not just to defend, but to last. He trained a standing army. He turned fear into strategy, hope into structure. And more than anything, Alfred turned faith into fire. To his people, this was not just a war. It was a holy struggle. Pagans had desecrated their land, killed their kings, and defiled their churches. And Alfred would give them vengeance. In 878 AD, he met the Viking armies at Edington and won. The Viking defeat was massive. Their confidence shattered. Ivar's alliances were unraveling, and his grip on the Danelaw began to weaken. He did not attend the battle. His shadow still loomed. His name still struck terror. But his body had betrayed him. Some say he died in Ireland, ruling Dublin as a Sea King before sickness took him. Others claim he perished in England, buried beneath a nameless mound, forgotten by those he once terrified. A few even believe he returned to Scandinavia, to die in peace far from the land he conquered in fury. The army fractured. The Danelaw stood, but weakened. The tides were shifting. Where once Viking hordes ruled unchecked, now they faced resistance, smarter, stronger, and united under Alfred's dream of one England. The nightmare was ending. But what he left behind was more than land. He reshaped its borders. He planted Norse settlements that would last for generations. He forced a fractured land to unify, if only to survive him. He introduced chaos, but chaos breeds transformation. And even in death, his legend endured. The great armies that once followed him now stood without a head. The unity he forged through vengeance fractured in his absence. With Ivar gone, and with the death of Ubba, the fading of Halfdan, and the retreat of other Norse warlords, the great heathen army collapsed into a tangle of warbands and scattered settlements. Despite the disintegration of its leadership, the Danelaw, the Viking-controlled region of England, held its ground. Towns like Jorvik, modern-day York, became Norse strongholds, vibrant with trade, ruled by jarls who had once served under Ivar or his successors. New cultures took root. Pagan rituals mixed with Christian festivals. Anglo-Saxon and Norse people intermarried, farmed together, traded goods, and, over generations, built something new, a hybrid culture neither fully English nor fully Norse. But the Saxons had not forgotten. Alfred the Great, now a legendary king in his own right, used the breathing space gifted by Ivar's absence to launch a counteroffensive of culture and construction. He built not just armies, but identity. Wessex became the heart of a dream: one England, one faith, one future. And with Alfred's death, that dream didn't die. Over the next several decades, Alfred's successors would wage a slow, relentless war against the remnants of the Danelaw. King Edward the Elder and his sister Ethelflaed of Mercia took city after city, reclaiming land that had been soaked in Viking blood. What Ivar had built through fire was being dismantled, piece by piece. But it wasn't all destruction. Many Norse settlers stayed, not as warriors, but as neighbors. They were baptized, married into Saxon families, and adopted local customs. Their language blended into Old English. Their myths faded, but not completely. Ivar's war had failed to make England a Norse empire. But it succeeded in making Norsemen a part of England. Before his disappearance from England, Ivar had ruled part of Ireland, seizing Dublin and installing himself as seeking a title more fitting for a man who seemed to exist more in myth than in flesh. After his death, his supposed descendants, the Uimir, descendants of Ivar, continued to rule parts of Ireland and the Isles for nearly a century. These kings clashed with Irish clans, fought for control of trade routes, and laid the foundation for a maritime Norse-Gaelic culture. Names like Sihtric, Ragnar, and Olaf Kvaran carried the weight of Ivar's legacy not just in blood, but in ambition. In the east, he had been a conqueror. In the west, he became a dynasty. In 1686, near Repton, England, a mass grave was discovered, filled with nearly 300 bodies, buried in haste and chaos. Among them, a man over 6 feet tall, his spine curved, his legs deformed. Some believe it was Ivar the Boneless. Perhaps. Perhaps not. There are no inscriptions. No weapons. No name. Just bones. And yet, the legend still lingers. The idea that a man who may have had no bones, or bones too fragile to carry him, could command empires, burn kingdoms, and bend history, that idea refuses to die. Because in the end, Ivar's greatest conquest wasn't land. It was memory. By the year 900 AD, England was beginning to unify. The Norse threat still loomed, especially from Denmark, but the age of large-scale Viking conquest in England was fading. The children born in the Danelaw were no longer warriors. They were farmers, traders, Englishmen. And yet, in stories told from fire to fire, one name returned again and again, the boneless king who could not stand, yet made the world kneel. Time buries many names. Kings rise, empires fall, and most are forgotten, lost to the dust and silence of history. But not Ivar. He remains. Not in the way of ordinary kings, with gilded statues or endless chronicles. But in whispers, in sagas, in fear. His story defies certainty. Was he a cripple, a genius, a demon? A man with broken bones, or a symbol of unbreakable will? Perhaps the truth is that he was all of them, and that's why he still matters. In a world that worshipped physical strength, Ivar was born without it. In a culture that left the weak to die, he survived. In an era defined by brute force, he conquered with mind, with strategy, and with terror. His story forces us to question how we define power. Is it in the swing of a sword? Or the silence before it falls? Is it in the body, or in the will? Ivar's greatest weapon was not an axe. It was the ability to bend the world to his shape, even when his own body could not support him. He made pain a crown. He turned deformity into dominance. He embodied something deeper than fear, inevitability. Ivar didn't just burn cities. He changed maps. His campaign shattered the illusion of Anglo-Saxon invincibility. He forced English kings to unite, and in doing so, helped forge the very kingdom that would one day become England. His armies laid the groundwork for the Danelaw, introduced Norse law, reshaped local dialects, and left behind not just graves, but names, customs, and bloodlines. In Dublin, his descendants would rule the seas for decades. In York, Norse coins with his kin's names would be minted. In Repton, his legacy may still rest beneath the soil, in a twisted spine, in bones that once defied fate. And in every child who hears a Viking tale, Ivar lives. Historians still debate the truth of his nickname. Was boneless a reference to disease? To his fluid, snake-like movements in battle? To his lack of mercy? Or was it something more symbolic, a way to turn Ivar into a mythic figure, something other, something that even time cannot touch? The sagas don't always care for facts, but they care for meaning. And the meaning of Ivar is survival. Not just surviving war, but surviving history itself. In the modern world, Ivar stands as a strange, dark hero. A man who was never supposed to rule. Who, by all rights, should have died nameless. Yet instead, became a name that outlived kings. His story challenges our assumptions about disability, about strength, about leadership. It reminds us that some of the greatest empires were shaped not by giants, but by the broken who refused to be buried.